Director Robert Michael Ryan brings us Popeye the Slayer Man. And this is one of 3 Popeye movies that are all about slasher killer Popeyes that have come out in 2025. Of course, this is the public domain frenzy that has been going on in the low budget horror arena. In 2026, expect to see slasher movies from Betty Boop, Pluto, and even Miss Marple as they all enter the public domain. Anyway, Popeye the Slayer Man. So this was the second out of the Popeye movies that came out, but I have watched this third. And this one is about a group of university or college students that are wanting to do a documentary on this supposed legend of the Sailor Man. And he is meant to haunt this abandoned factory that was once a thriving canning business. And guess what they used to can? Spinach. And this is located by the docks. And there's been long since rumours about this Slayer Man who will kill anyone that kind of comes into his territory. So this group of filmmakers decide to break into this abandoned factory to try and get some evidence about what's happened. And inevitably, the Popeye character is in there. We get a few other people kind of turning up as the film goes on. We get a conspiracy about what's actually the backstory. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So it's easy to dismiss these type of movies as complete trash, but I like to have a little bit of a critical look at them and talk about if there is anything that actually genuinely works. And I have to say, this movie was more entertaining than I was expecting. This movie's tone is somewhat serious, maybe not quite as much as the Popeye Revenge movie, but certainly more than the Shiver Me Timbers movie. So it's relatively kind of serious. There's a couple of like sort of lighter moments, so to speak, but for the most part it's taken reasonably serious. What can we say that does work in this film? Now, I do think out of the 3 Popeye movies that I've seen, they do the most interesting stuff with the Popeye character in this one. I would say he gets the most comprehensive backstory in this, and they've even made him a little bit sympathetic to a degree. He is the antagonist, but they have tried to make him have a somewhat of a Frankenstein's monster style backstory here. I won't go into details. Suffice to say that, you know, it's not necessarily him being evil exactly. Or at least that's the idea. I don't think it quite works in practice, but there you go. So the look of Popeye is very close to the actual cartoons. He's a grotesque figure looking very much like a live adaptation directly from the cartoons of Popeye and the kind of the original kind of drawings and things. So it's that translated to live action, whilst the other ones have been more interpretations. I would say this is more of a, at least visually, a direct look in regards to that. He's also a lot more in regards to the spinach, and this spinach is actually integral to the actual kind of backstory, and it's a reasonable, I mean, for a B movie, it's a reasonable idea here. It's not really discovered about what's going on until about halfway through the movie, but I won't point it out here. But suffice to say, I do think they've kind of worked in a fun sort of B movie angle for this. Now, with Popeye in this movie, he's more of a bruiser. He's actually much more into like pummeling his opponents. We actually see a photograph of him suggesting that he was once a boxer. So there is a bit of kind of slashing, so to speak, but he's much more about pummeling his victims rather than sort of using implements. There's a degree of that, but yeah, again, it's sort of, there are more nods here to the kind of the source material than maybe the other 2 to a degree. None of these movies have Bluto, which I thought maybe would have been a kind of unique selling point, but there you go, missed opportunity and all that. So, what else can we say that works? I mean, this location I think is pretty strong. This kind of unused kind of factory sort of setting I think looks actually quite creepy at times. It's quite vast and therefore I think looks sort of somewhat oppressive when you're kind of in this kind of dark sort of space. And I do like some of the cinematography here where we kind of see the Popeye characters that have come in and out of shadows, and I think that's kind of used to quite effect. There are a couple of lighter tones, as I've said, that whilst this is not being a kind of a comedy or a silly spoof like the Shiver Me Timbers movie. For example, you know, there's a kind of seasoned old sailor at the bar who keeps warning anyone who will listen not to go into the factory, and like it's kind of played for laughs because you get this kind of like shanty kind of music playing when he's talking, and they just go, "Shut up, Bernie." It was kind of funny. So I thought that was quite good. I do think there are some interesting things done here with our group of protagonists. I think actually they've done a reasonable job here of making a somewhat interesting group of people with some sort of personality traits which I think are a little bit off type, or at least for some of them. For example, our main male protagonist is a little bit, he's the kind of a techie guy. He's also got this like female friend who, you know, he's kind of looks after him, and she's interested in this other guy. There's this other woman who's like has a little bit of a problem with a domestic abuse with her boyfriend, and then they've got his friends. I mean, they're a bit cliche admittedly, but even then there's a little bit of an attempt here. We have this abuser boyfriend, and he does try a couple of times to still help his girlfriend, even though he's painted to be clearly a somewhat of an antagonist. So I kind of quite liked some of the the characters here. I actually thought they were all relatively distinct and weren't as typical maybe as some of these, and that were a little bit more memorable than some of these kind of like low budget kind of slasher films. There's a reasonable amount of kind of violence on screen here. I mean, there's not loads of gore necessarily, but I think there's a couple of okay sort of sequences here. And as I say, I think the decision here to have Popeye more of a, as I say, a brawler than a slasher, but he'll kill you with his, you know, with his bare hands. Again makes it a bit more interesting and a little bit more kind of like, with the idea being that the original character obviously didn't use weapons and things. So again, it's a little bit closer to the original sort of stories. Not that I'm saying this is a faithful adaptation. I appreciate a lot of people don't like these public domain movies, but they feel it's warping sort of childhood properties that some people hold quite dear. I'm not saying this is a legitimate adaptation of that, but I think maybe this is closer than some, is what I'm trying to get at here. The actual makeup of Popeye, it doesn't look realistic, but I kind of liked it because it looks sort of grotesque, and because of you are explaining the reasons how he's got like that. And I think, okay, I buy it. For this movie, I can kind of buy the reasons, and it's done practically, unlike Shiver Me Timbers. So it has an element of interest. Like I say, I think the characters were reasonably interesting. I think the Popeye backstory was reasonably interesting, and the idea of him of being somewhat sympathetic, again, makes me a little bit more interested in the character than some. But let's now look at the flip side of that coin. Now, I think they want to have their cake and eat it too in regards to making the Popeye character an antagonist, but also sympathetic, because without spoiling anything, the Popeye character seems to choose not to kill certain people. And you might say, oh, well, you know, he's clearly not killing people who are threatening to him. But that's not exactly true, because there are elements in this movie. There's at least two people that I would say that the Popeye character kills who are in no way threatening him. So it kind of cheats, because I feel the movie's internal logic is a little bit all over the shop with that. And the other thing, again, with that same sort of idea here, that maybe this movie doesn't quite land in certain aspects, certain plot points. The idea here that this group of young people are making a documentary, I mean, we see no attempt here, even before they really discover that there's a killer on the loose, that they're actually making a documentary. They seem to have no idea about what they're actually looking for or doing there. They're just going to break into this plant with a couple of cameras, no lights. They're never really seeming filming like an introduction or anything like that. So the whole idea of making a documentary is just an excuse to get these young people into this kind of like this killing field. So again, some of the kind of the attention to detail here is just a little lacking. Also lacking is the gore with this one. I will say I think this movie's gore is probably the least out of the 3 films that I've seen so far. They do try to achieve it practically, but it's not particularly kind of well done. The effects here do look a little on the cheaper side. I think this movie's like money has been spent on location shooting, which I do appreciate. And that does give the movie a bit more of a higher production value to maybe, but where it does lose a little bit of the kind of the production value is in, as I say, the practical VFX, the gores. They look very cheap. The kills, they kind of not particularly kind of impressive, and even sort of some of the kill shots that we've seen. Again, there's a couple which are okay, but there's nothing really here that I think stands out. It does even go into somewhat silly territory where we have even some people even get killed by nothing to do with Popeye and just by their own clumsiness. And I'm thinking, well, what is the point? What is the point? I mean, it just seemed a waste. I mean, you people have come here to watch Popeye the Slayer Man, and then you've got people getting killed purely through their own being a dumbass, basically. Anyway, and in that whole scene, I mean, I don't spoil it for you, but thinking that wouldn't happen. That wouldn't happen like that. I mean, yes, it would hurt, but it wouldn't, you know. Anyway. So this movie has plenty of kind of dumb moments, to be honest with you. And the whole premise is obviously very, very silly. The acting is fine, but it's nothing to kind of write home about necessarily. It's a watchable slasher film. I'd say that. I mean, again, if you just compare this like it wasn't Popeye, it was just some other slasher, I would say this is probably somewhat of an average kind of slasher film. And it's not a bad film, I would say. I mean, it's certainly a lot better than Popeye's Revenge, which is the weakest out of these 3 films. But it's not, and I wouldn't class this as a necessarily a great movie at any chance, but it's about average, to be honest. As such, I'll give it about 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.